I did my presentation on racism on young Black Canadians. The title of the article is Dominant Cultural Narratives, Racism and Resistance in the Workplace, a study of the experiences of young Black Canadians. The background, little research has been done to examine experiences of racism for Black youth in the workplace. So we have decided that let's do one right now. There was a study of quantitative analysis of how narrative interviews with 24 Black Canadian boys between the ages of 16 and 35. They expect the impact of dominant cultural narratives on live experiences of racism and resistance in the workplace. The findings are presented using theatrical games, which is racism and resistance in the workplace. We would be looking at dominant cultural narratives, how they have a crucial impact on relational dynamics, persecution in the workplace. We'll also be looking at identity performance as a sensory strategy to arrange dominant cultural narratives in the workplace. And we will also look at panopticism, which is an essential aspect of internalizing persecution or repression. And then future research and actions are discussed later in the article. For the introduction, I want to say that Black youth has had unemployment rates that are more than twice as high as the white youth. The workplace has also been a sensitive site of racism and resistance for young folks, especially Black people. And oppression is defined as a mood of lopsided of power connection distinguished by domination, subordination, and resistance. Dominant cultural narrative is defined as overlearned stories told through social networks and mass media. Resistance is defined as like the span of answers and the different strategies that Black people use to overcome racial stereotypes in the workplace. Racism is defined as a structure of oppression based on physical and racial and like your race difference that is greatly implanted with dominant cultural narratives and social institutions. For the methods, we had 24 Black Canadians participate in the study. It was a purposeful sampling strategy which was stratified by gender, using 12 males and 12 females. They were recruited through community-based agencies, youth hiring programs, and through distinctive networks of Black professionals. Data was collected through a semi-structured open-ended interview, which consisted of 10 questions about how they felt in the workplace. And those questions consisted of like what did they enjoy the least about their workplace, which was like a unforgettable low point that they experienced at work, or a time where they felt kept out of work because of their race. And the systematic strategy that we will be using for our primary unit of analysis is an applied constructivist GT coding procedures with an emphasis on narrative content. The analysis occurred in 6 phases. Phase 1 involves developing a code book, which would be useful for concisely and systematically growing and registering analytical ideas and qualitative experiments. Phase 2 involved peer debriefing to investigate and increase the trustworthiness of broad analytical directions for the data. Phase 3 involves initial coding of the entire set of transcripts to be used as an overarching structure for organizing initial codes. Phase 4 involves focus coding, where the initial code and data are reviewed. Phase 5 involves theoretical coding to emphasize the connections between categories. And phase 6 is where conducting memory checking takes place by seeing a 2-page summary of your findings. The results, we will talk about the influence of dominant cultural narratives on the experiences of racism and resistance. Dominant cultural narratives about the Black youth produce a sequence of prejudice and resistance in the workplace, competing racialized dramas that reproduce oppression through reenactments of prejudice scripts and characterization that oppose oppression by means of planned performances of the self. At the collective level, dominant cultural narratives were reflected by racial characterizations, which are stereotype scripts that tell the behaviors of young Black workers, and playing alone also. Three types of racial characterizations that were included were the scary Black person, which is a Black youth who is prone to violence or crime. The underachiever, who represents Black people who are lazy or even baby mamas, and the minstrel, who would represent black people who are lively and that just really like enjoy life. At a relational level, dominant culture narratives produce reenactments of dominant subordinate prejudice relations. The four types of reenactments are excluding, where black people are excluded from activities or information due to their race; disciplining, where black people they face untrue discipline for like minor mistakes that they make in the workplace; condescending, where black people uh, they tend to intake all the racial stereotypes, and they start to fall like they start to fall in line with the stereotype due to all the racial stereotypes and name calling, which could be racial slurs and stuff like that. At the personal level, the effects of dominant culture were characterized by an overarching sense of performance anxiety. And this performance anxiety was distinguished into three dimensions, including race awareness, which is being aware of standing out or being judged or watched by others because of your race; racism sensitivity, which is being treated differently from others because of your race; and anger and sadness, which can occur from being excluded from the workplace because of your race. We're going to also now talk about how black youth resisted dominant cultural narratives in the workplace. At the relational level, black youth used four strategies to resist this, which they were named and challenged the racial stereotypes; transcending, which would be working harder to overcome the racial stereotype to show that all black people don't have low expectations for performance in the workplace; exploiting, which is behaviors that overstated or downplay racial stereotypes; and quitting due to unfair discipline or condescension. At the personal level, resistance came in two forms, including acceptance, which is accepting racial or dominant culture narratives, and reframing internally, which is internally challenging racist dominant culture narratives. The discussion, the findings are consistent with the existing literature related to race, persecution, and hiring among black populations. The types of racial characterizations to scary black person to underachieving the minstrel are consistent with how they are perceived in the Western culture. The media plays a role in keeping alive stereotypes, and dominant culture narratives forces performance strategies to resist racial stereotypes in the workplace. The sense of being watched or judged resembles the notion of panopticism. And further research, there is a need for an in-depth study of prejudice, identity, performance within an intersectional focus on male and female. There's a need for a larger, more diverse sample, which will enable us to compare the analysis of oppression and resistance by ethnicity and age, or by other dimensions of diversity. Three promising areas for action research includes interventions aimed at destroying racial stereotypes about blackness by encouraging favorable presentations or promoting things that would be in favor of that culture. Youth hiring intervention that embodies fostering social political consciousness to enable youth to critically observe and question dominant cultural narratives. And three, it would be culture. It will also culture sensitivity training for assertive groups, pointing at observing internalized prejudice and communication between people from two different cultures. And this is my presentation. Thank you.